What would you do if you had everything money could buy, but realized at age 23 that every friend you had was fake? Ethan Whitmore, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune worth $3 billion, made that devastating discovery on his birthday when not a single person showed up to celebrate, except the woman who'd been making his coffee every morning for 6 months. Maria Santos, a quiet cafe worker putting herself through nursing school, taught Ethan something that no amount of wealth could buy: the difference between being surrounded by people and actually being known by someone. This is the story of how loneliness in a penthouse led to connection in a coffee shop, and why the most valuable things in life can't be purchased. They can only be earned through vulnerability and authenticity. Ethan Whitmore's Instagram showed a life that most people would envy: private jets, exclusive clubs, luxury vacations, and photos with hundreds of friends at parties that cost more than most people's annual salaries. At 23, he'd never worked a day in his life, living off a trust fund that generated more monthly income than doctors or lawyers earned in a year. His days were filled with activities: personal trainers, social events, investment meetings his father insisted he attend. But somewhere underneath the expensive distractions, Ethan felt a hollowness he couldn't articulate or escape. Every relationship in his life felt transactional, every conversation superficial, and every friendship contingent on his continued access to wealth and status. The awakening came on his 23rd birthday. Ethan had organized an elaborate party at an upscale Manhattan venue, inviting over 100 people he considered friends, people he'd partied with, traveled with, and spent countless hours with over the years. He'd spent $20,000 on the event, sent personal invitations, and waited for responses. 20 people RSVP'd yes. On the actual night, 7 showed up, stayed for less than an hour while drinking his expensive champagne, and left early for other commitments. By 10 p.m., Ethan was alone in a venue designed for 100 guests, surrounded by untouched food and decorations that suddenly felt like monuments to his isolation. He sat there for 30 minutes in complete silence before walking out and going home to his empty penthouse. The next morning, Ethan went to the only place that felt remotely normal in his manufactured life: a small cafe 3 blocks from his apartment that he'd been visiting daily for 6 months. The cafe was unimpressive by his usual standards. No Instagram-worthy aesthetic, no celebrity clientele, just decent coffee and quiet atmosphere. The reason Ethan kept coming back wasn't the coffee. It was Maria, the morning shift barista who greeted him with genuine warmth but never treated him differently despite knowing exactly who he was. She was the only person in his life who seemed interested in him as a person rather than as a bank account, and their brief morning conversations had become the most authentic human interaction in his otherwise hollow social life. That morning after his disastrous birthday, Maria took one look at Ethan's face and knew something was wrong. She handed him his usual coffee, black, no sugar, and said quietly, "Rough night." Ethan's carefully maintained composure cracked. "My birthday was yesterday. 7 people showed up out of 100 invited. 7. And they all left within an hour." Maria didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. She simply said, "Those weren't your friends, Ethan. You know that, right? You've always known that." The statement hit Ethan like a physical blow because she was right. He had always known, but hearing someone else say it out loud made it impossible to keep pretending that Maria's shift ended at noon. And in an unprecedented move, she asked Ethan if he wanted to grab lunch at a taco stand near the cafe. For the first time in his life, Ethan ate a $5 meal on a plastic chair at a fold-out table on a city sidewalk, and it felt more real than any Michelin-starred restaurant he'd been to. Maria told him about her life: immigrating from El Salvador at 15, working multiple jobs to support her family while attending community college, now in her final year of nursing school with dreams of working in pediatric oncology. She described friendships built over years of shared struggles, people who showed up for each other not because of what they could get, but because they genuinely cared. Her life had far less money, but far more meaning than anything Ethan had experienced. "Here's what you need to understand," Maria said between bites of her taco. "Friendship isn't built on what you have or what you can do for people. It's built on vulnerability, consistency, and actually knowing each other beyond surface level. Nobody at your party knows you, Ethan. They know your bank account, your last name, your social media presence. But do any of them know what keeps you awake at night? What you're actually afraid of? what you dream about beyond maintaining your lifestyle. Do you even know those things about yourself? Ethan sat in silence because the answer was no. He'd spent so much energy performing wealth and status that he'd never developed an actual personality beyond his financial identity. Maria continued, "Every morning you come into the cafe wearing a different designer outfit that probably costs what I make in a month. You order coffee that you barely drink while checking your phone for messages from people who don't really care about you. You tip well, which I appreciate, but you tip everyone well, which makes it meaningless. You're trying to buy connection the same way you buy everything else, but that's not how it works. Real friendship requires risk, the risk of being rejected for who you actually are rather than what you can provide. You've never taken that risk because you're terrified of finding out that without your money, you might not have anything else to offer." The words were harsh, but delivered with compassion rather than judgment, and Ethan recognized truth when he heard it. Maria wasn't trying to hurt him. She was trying to wake him up from a life that looked glamorous from outside, but felt empty from within. "So what do I do?" Ethan asked, his voice small in a way it hadn't been since childhood. Maria smiled. "You start being real. You stop performing wealth and start sharing yourself. You find activities and communities based on actual interests rather than social status. You accept that building genuine friendships takes time and vulnerability, and there's no shortcut you can buy. And you get comfortable with the fact that some people won't like the real you, which is infinitely better than everyone liking a fake version you've been performing." What happened over the next year was a complete reconstruction of Ethan's life and identity. He started volunteering at the hospital where Maria did her nursing clinicals. Initially, just pushing wheelchairs and delivering flowers, but eventually finding genuine purpose in making patients' days slightly better. He joined a community basketball league where nobody knew or cared about his wealth, making friends based on shared love of the game rather than what he could do for them. He took classes at community college under a different name, studying philosophy and psychology because they interested him, not because they would enhance his resume or social status. He dramatically reduced his social media presence, stopped attending society parties, and let all his transactional friendships naturally fade away when he stopped funding them. The transformation wasn't easy. There were months where Ethan felt lonelier than ever because he'd removed the illusion of connection without yet building real relationships. There were moments of doubt where he questioned whether authenticity was worth the isolation, whether performing wealth and having fake friends wasn't better than being genuine and having no one. But Maria reminded him, loneliness in truth is temporary. Loneliness while surrounded by people using you is permanent. Keep going. She introduced him to her friend group, nurses, students, teachers, people living real lives with real struggles. And Ethan learned what actual friendship looked like. People who showed up when you needed help, who called just to talk without wanting anything, who celebrated your successes and supported you through failures. 2 years after that devastating birthday party, Ethan organized a small dinner at a modest restaurant. He invited 8 people, Maria and 7 others he'd met through volunteering, basketball, and classes. These weren't impressive people by his old social circle standards. They were a nurse, a teacher, a social worker, a grad student, a mechanic, a freelance writer, and a firefighter. But they were people who actually knew him, who'd seen him at his worst and still wanted to be around him, who valued him for his character rather than his checkbook. When Maria gave a toast saying, "To Ethan, who had the courage to become real instead of staying rich and hollow," everyone raised their glasses, and Ethan felt something he'd never experienced before: genuine belonging. Ethan Whitmore's story reveals an uncomfortable truth about wealth and connection. Money can buy company, but it can't buy friendship. It can fill your calendar with events and your photos with faces, but it can't create the vulnerability, consistency, and authenticity that real relationships require. Maria Santos taught Ethan that the question isn't, "Do I have friends?" but, "Am I actually known by anyone?" Being known requires risk, the risk that people might reject the real you rather than the performed version. But that risk is the only path to the connection that makes life meaningful rather than just comfortable. This story challenges all of us, regardless of wealth, to examine our own relationships. How many of our friendships are actually authentic? And how many are performances of connection built on mutual use rather than genuine care? How often do we share our real struggles, fears, and dreams versus the curated highlights we think will maintain people's interest? And are we showing up for others in ways that demonstrate care beyond what's convenient or transactional? Real friendship is built in hospital waiting rooms and late-night phone calls, in showing up when it's inconvenient and staying present through boring or difficult moments. It can't be bought or performed. It can only be built through consistent authenticity over time. That if you're someone surrounded by people but feeling alone, let Ethan's story give you permission to rebuild. Let go of relationships built on what you provide rather than who you are. Find communities based on shared values and interests rather than status or utility. Accept that you might be temporarily lonely while building something real, and trust that authentic connection is worth the discomfort of transition. And if you're someone like Maria who sees others struggling with loneliness despite apparent social success, speak truth with compassion. Sometimes people need permission to stop performing and start being real, and your honesty might be exactly what saves them. Like and subscribe for more stories about finding meaning beyond material success and building authentic connection in a world of performance. Comment about your own journey toward genuine friendship or people who taught you what truly matters. And remember, the most valuable things in life, love, friendship, purpose, belonging, can't be purchased at any price. They can only be earned through vulnerability, consistency, and the courage to be genuinely yourself.